Growing up, I was always interested in technology, so much so that I decided to attend a technical high school for its applied engineering technology program. Specifically, I was in the green energy program, learning about all the new alternative forms of energy that started to come onto the market. This was in 2010, and one of the things that I remember most was how often they warned us of a looming energy crisis. They talked about massive efficiency losses, where most energy is lost or used up just to produce it. One proposed solution was the development of green energy technology, such as solar panels and wind turbines. However, as the technology further developed, it became glaringly obvious that the amount of energy required to create the infrastructure to capture green energy was outweighed the output over its life cycle, especially factoring in intermittency, maintenance cost, and storage needs. In other words, it wasn't going to fully solve the energy crisis on its own. Fast forward to today, and energy challenges are still a major issue. The green energy push has fallen short of replacing fossils at scale, and we are still searching for that breakthrough technology that can still deliver reliable, abundant, safe power. This is where I believe thorium comes into play. The recent advances in thorium technology may very well prove that it could be the solution to the energy crisis that we've been facing for decades, and most people have never even heard of it. Thorium, element number 90 on the periodic table, is a silvery white radioactive metal that starts off shiny but quickly tarnishes to a dull gray when exposed to air. What's crazy is just how abundant it really is. It's about 3 to 4 times more common in the Earth's crust than uranium is. Now, because you need uranium 235 for nuclear energy, which is only 0.7% of natural uranium, most being U-238, meaning 99.3% of uranium is unable to reach nuclear grade without needing costly enrichment. Thorium, on the other hand, is already 100% nuclear grade, making it 500 times more plentiful than the naturally occurring U-235 reserves. So the point being is, it's not some rare unicorn resource, it's literally everywhere, just waiting to be tapped. First discovered in the 1800s and first tested for its energy capabilities in the 1940s, it was then pushed aside in favor of another, more dangerous compound, uranium. Uranium had weapons applications, which were discovered during the Manhattan Project, and it is also required a massive infrastructure in order to create these power stations for uranium, which will help centralize the energy industry. For these reasons, they decided to pursue uranium's development over thorium. Thorium uses much smaller molten scale salt reactors that can't melt down, making it a much safer alternative. And because it's a small scale nature, each community would have its own thorium generator that could easily power the entire area, decentralizing energy and making it more accessible for everyone. There has also been profound implications for the oil sector, and at the height of the Cold War, it would have been extremely disadvantageous to present a technology that could make all of the existing oil infrastructure potentially obsolete. This is why I believe funding for thorium and its development was deliberately shifted during this time and eventually fully defunded in the 1970s in order to make way for a more dangerous but centralized nuclear energy via uranium and to secure the United States petrodollar deal, ensuring that the oil sector would remain strong for years to come. Today, thorium is being rediscovered through declassified documents and developed as it should have been decades ago. The only problem is the leading developer is China, and they cite our declassified documents as their work. But I believe that the race to perfect thorium technology may be what finally solves the energy crisis, and the country that develops this technology will reap massive economic benefits. The story sounds ripped from Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged, where centralized looters crush decentralized innovation, Rearden Metal, or Galt's motor to protect their control. Mike Brakey's about to show us thorium is that real world breakthrough the producers were ready to deliver if only the moochers would get out the way. So, what you're about to see is a presentation by Mike Brakey, also known as the Anonymous Patriot Condor. He's a globally recognized expert in energy, avid thorium investigator, and fellow libertarian. For the first time ever, he's about to expose decades of research on the subject and really dive deep into what actually happened with thorium technology and how far a state will go to protect its own interests, even at the detriment of the citizens it's supposed to govern. I'm extremely grateful that he took this time to put this amazing presentation on the topic together and was able to present it to us with so much information and such a deep dive that I'm going to break it into three different parts. Part one, which you are going to see today, is going to be the thorium story. Part two is going to be the connection to Atlas Shrugged, and part three is going to be a Q&A session. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope you get as much enjoyment out of this as I have. So let's get into part one of Thorium's Atlas Shrugged moment, unlocking the forbidden fuel. Anonymous
All
Patriot
right.
Condor, thank you so much for doing this, and I do appreciate you putting together, of course, this wonderful presentation and sharing all of your knowledge on the subject, So I guess we should start off with a little bit about yourself, if you'd like to, tell us
Okay.
about what you do and how you got into this.
All right. And we'll get into that a little bit as we proceed into this. So I'm going to drop this. I'm, a lot of my writings is under the Anonymous Patriot Condor. That's been true since about 2017, 2018. Here's a quick bio for myself. Engineering physics, nuclear minor, 75. I wrote a thesis around that time on the impact of a nuclear accident on future world events. I did that in 76, and 3 Mile occurred 3 years later, 79. Another thesis, a sequel in 79, again focused on the importance of abundant, cheap, clean energy, because that's my business, my field of expertise. Got an MBA, EMBA, executive MBA, strategic planning and marketing. A thesis I did there was big oil dictates prices whenever their capacity hits 90%. 50 years in the energy industry, plus a lot of international joint venture experience, Japan and Europe, whatnot. Um, During my time, I 6 U.S. and international patents, again involving energy technology. Founder of a couple of Ohio energy consulting firms beginning in '99. Winner of a lifetime distinguished engineering award due to my energy exploits. In Ohio, I kind of gained a reputation almost as a Sherlock Holmes of solving energy mysteries. Always enjoyed that too. And it's for that reason that it was in 2011, I was asked if I could investigate a real life, global changing energy mystery that arose out of the 1950s and 60s. And so this is going to be three parts. The first part, part one, is the thorium story. That's about 33 slides. Part two is the Atlas Shrugged code, something that fell out of my research as I was working on the thorium. And then there's part three, questions and answers. You had sent some questions to me, and I was going to try to address those a bit. So with that, we'll get started here. This happens to be the outfit that contacted me. They were the Thorium 90 organization from Ohio, Energy from Thorium Foundation, as you can see on the top there. And here's what was going on. The energy mystery I was asked to investigate it centered around the rediscovery, not the discovery, but rediscovery of a remarkable thorium energy technology, which essentially replicated the geothermal process heating the interior of our planet for billions of years. The element thorium, TH232, one of the top 50 most plentiful elements on Earth, helps to heat the interior of our planet to over 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And that, again, is for billions of years, just a stable source of energy. The amazing thing is a single pound of thorium generates more energy than 200 pounds of uranium or even 3.5 million pounds of coal. Think about that. We're talking about 30 trucks, 60 tons in each, needed to haul 3.5 million pounds of coal versus a single pound of thorium. Again, one of the most plentiful materials on the planet. It's been published how just a bowling ball of thorium has more energy in it than even a super tanker of oil. Why is the energy so important? Well, let's get into some numbers here. Looking at the national level, we have to talk about quads. One quad of energy is about equal to 45 million tons of coal, a trillion cubic feet of natural gas, or about 170 million barrels of crude oil. How much does the United States use? Well, in 1963, we were around 50 quads of energy. The thorium required to do that would essentially be a cube 12.5 feet on the side. That's essentially like a storage container, 8 feet by 8 feet by 30 feet long. Imagine that. All the energy we used in 1963 would fit into this storage vehicle. By 2000, we're at 99 quads. Thorium, well, the cube would increase a little bit, a couple of feet. It'd be 15, almost 16 feet cube, which would be, well, an 18-wheeler goes up to 53 feet. If you fill that up with thorium that's going to be used in 2000, it'd be about 95 quads of thorium. That's all you would need, essentially a truckload there, for all the energy services we needed in the United States in 2000. Now, the Earth's core generates about 20 million megawatts, that's 1,000 kilowatts, of geothermal heat energy on an hourly basis, whereas the United States was about 99 quads in 2000. The Earth generates around 600 quads of energy a year, which would have probably taken care of the entire planet if we could have captured that heat and used it on the surface. So with 600 quads, to equate, this equates to a little more than about 6 trailers of thorium. Now, you have the Limerick Clean Energy Center near you. In fact, I think you said you're just about in its shadow, are you not?
Yeah, I'm a little bit too close to comfort for that. Can actually see it right out the window, but yes.
Oh, okay. Well, if it produces up to 2,317 megawatts per hour, they say that would cover your home and about 1.7 million other homes. If we could tap into the 600 quads of geothermal thorium energy, how many Limerick-like reactors might it equal? And I mean by reactors, I mean you have 2 of them at that site, so both of them together. If we could draw that energy from the interior with thorium and bring it to the surface, it would be equivalent to almost 9,000 Limerick nuclear centers running around the clock for millions of years, and you'd still have a ton of thorium available for hundreds of thousands of years more. What if, though, instead of drilling deep wells into this vast geothermal resource, we could just replicate the process inexpensively on the surface of the planet at atmospheric pressure for endless years to come? This geothermal technology was first successfully operated at atmospheric pressure in a liquefied thorium pool of molten salts back in 1953. This was phase one of a secret program we were doing in the United States at Oak Ridge National Laboratories. In fact, here's a picture. I don't know how recently it was released because I know as of 1962 with Cult of the Atom, a guy named Daniel Ford used the Freedom of Information Act to find out anything going on with nuclear energy to see what was going on there. And in all the research he got, the papers, now thorium was not mentioned once in it, only uranium and plutonium. So they still kept that away from people in 82. So this is 1953, and it worked successfully. And here is the inventor of this and the light water reactor, Alvin Weinberg. We'll see more of him later, and he's important for a number of the sessions we'll be talking about today. Anyway, the program went silent under the National Security Act of 1947. They were using the Cold War to keep it under wraps. It was so successful. Now, they had planned to use this on strategic bombers to keep them in flight for weeks or months. You'd use fuel to get the plane up. Then you have these thorium molten salt reactors in the plane, and they would supply the energy for the plane while it's in flight. The thing is, about the time they were looking to implement this, and they had tested it on some planes, then the intercontinental ballistic missiles technology arose, and so it was decided they didn't need this for that. But they knew it generated a lot of heat, a lot of energy, and Alvin Weinberg was able to launch a phase two where this was 150 kilowatts. They increased it 50-fold to go to 7,500 kilowatts. So 3 decades later, Gall technology was found abandoned and hidden behind a vaulted wall within a secret Manhattan laboratory. The public didn't know what was going on, and all evidence was it was successful technology, but what happened? Why did it disappear? And it was discovered hidden behind a laboratory vault 30 years later. So that's what I was asked to investigate. I began investigating the disappearance of the geothermal atmospheric liquefied thorium technology by tracking down the inventor and the inventor's antagonists. If you can follow those two individuals, you'll see what's going on. Research was expanded to include individuals from all walks of life immediately after World War II who participated in what I suspect, as well as others, was a perfect crime against humanity during the last half of the 20th century. So I got into a lot of paperwork, downloading and archiving to date over 20,000 magazines, periodicals, videos, Freedom of Information Act requests involving the 20th century. Right now, I have over 109 gigabytes of hard drive memory on this, and with my backup drives and so forth, because it's been so much work, I'd hate to lose it. Sometimes people say, well, but the stuff came off the internet. Well, everything comes off the internet now, but I also show all the other things, again, the magazine articles, the videos, tracking down and purchasing scores of out-of-print books of the time is shown here. After spending several years investigating this mystery, I gave my initial findings to the Thorium Foundation in 2014. Now, remember, an autopsy is a surgical procedure that consists of a thorough examination of the corpse which was the molten salt thorium reactor, by dissecting and determining the cause, mode, and manner of death, or assassination, or sabotage, or whatever. It appears, in my opinion, it appears a perfect crime when undetected for over 3 decades, and would have likely continued except for the fact the false laboratory vault was constructed with such haste, no one had time to spend the $50,000 to even clean out the chemical reactor properly and prep it for long-term entombment. Whoever was behind it and wanted to cover it up and hide it, that ended up, that $50,000 they didn't spend back then. Well, I talked to Oak Ridge National Laboratories, and they've told me that the U.S. government is now budgeting around $1 billion for cleanup through 2030. Ouch. You start a little reactor. Here is the one that was 50 times larger. This is a 1965 photograph, Oak Ridge Phase 2 Galt chemical reactor. Tens of billions of dollars in U.S. tax funding in present-day dollars for what went on between the right after the World War II and to 1965 here. Here's going to be a 5-minute autopsy of the perfect crime. And you can see the size of it a dozen years after Phase 1 testing, as can be seen by the technician above. If you look here, you can see the size of this by the technician working in there. Phase 2 testing had been scaled up, as I said, about 50-fold to 7,500 kW. The reason for that, it's inside baseball. There are a lot of congressional people who were controlled by the oil industry. They had control of the purse at the time. Chairman of the Joint Committee on Atomic Energy was a Chester Holyfield, and anything over 10,000 kilowatt demand he controlled and could say yes or no to. So in my investigation, as you'll learn a little later in this, is President Kennedy was high on this, and he told Alvin Weinberg, who was his scientific advisor at the time, that hell, let's go 7,500 kilowatt demand. That's under the threshold that the politicians for oil can block us, and we'll use some executive funds to run it. So just a little bit of inside baseball there. These tests proved just as successful as Phase 1 testing, which had taken place back in 1953. In fact, here is a photograph. This is 1969. Now, I call it, it's a thorium molten salt reactor. I call it GALT because it's geothermal. It's what heats the interior of a planet. It operates at atmospheric pressure in liquefied thorium. And you can see from the picture here, they're taking a photograph. Again, all this is top secret, and this stuff isn't getting out for 20 or 30 years. But here they are shaking hands, Alvin Weinberg with one of the supervisors. They've just hit 6,000 hours with this technology, full power, phenomenal. But to give you an idea of some of the turbulence they were hitting, one of the gentlemen, this one here is going to be talking about 30 or 40 years later, and when he was being interviewed, here's what he had to say. There was ample evidence the tests, as I said, were highly successful. And, well...
He called up Alvin Weinberg and says, stop that reactor experiment, MSRE, fire everybody, just tell them to clear out their desk, go home, and send me the money. Weinberg says, Bill, if we do what you say, you're going to have to send us some more money because we'll have contracts to pay everybody off. The termination of the components sections, and the reactor had first gone critical in June of 1965, and from that time, from sometime early in 65 until late in 69, we had kept it hot, salt molten, around the clock coverage. 340 dead,
So essentially, you can see there that in the aftermath, we're finding out the turbulence they're hitting back then, because some politicians was furious how Alvin Weinberg was able to circumvent some of the barriers they had. On September 21, 1972, soon after Alvin Weinberg was fired, and we'll get into that later, on September 21, 1972, a fraudulent document, WASH 1222, stealthily appeared in the office laboratory files. In it, it stated, should the nuclear industry ever implode at some future date with the light water reactor fueled with uranium, do not consider revisiting thorium technology. The document said that stated that thorium experiment had been an abject failure, a waste of time and money. Well, we'll follow up on this, but you're seeing all the head resistance people had with the thorium. And yet, 53 years later, here's the news. I reported this at PorkFest in New Hampshire last year. Thorium news out of China. China completes monumental task using declassified U.S. documents. We mastered every technique in the literature that pushed further. The Chinese team studied the American research from the late 40s through the 60s and recreated the old experiments. Apparently, they did not get that memo that says it didn't work. And here were people congratulating when they hit the 6,000 hours. The Chinese chief scientist Su Hongji remarked recently, rabbits sometimes make mistakes or grow lazy. That is when the tortoise seizes its chance. The U.S. left the research publicly available, waiting for the right successor. We were that successor. Well, there's a little more to it. What the hell happened? Well, here's some of the things. Now, China entered the thorium race in 2011. That's 55 years after we started it up. Why were we still stuck at the starting date in 2025? Well, there's a lot of things going on in Washington, D.C., and I've seen over time it's the Federal Reserve that seems, with its money, to control a lot of things there. The banksters plan to sabotage, in my opinion, the banksters plan to sabotage the thorium energy technology. It began immediately after Glenn Seaborg made the $500 quadrillion fission discovery at 9:44 p.m. on February 2nd, 1942. We're in the middle of the war with the Axis powers. And that's Glenn Seaborg. I'm showing this picture because he's going to show up in many of the parts, get people used to some of the images. Invested in oil, and they're also invested in the Federal Reserve, the private Federal Reserve Bank, and defense weapons. The banksters, in my opinion, pulled all the strings necessary to keep thorium from bankrupting their future monopolies, including they were anticipating highly profitable nuclear arms race material funding, because they also controlled the defense industry. So one of the first things they did, one of the first balls wrapped around the U.S., the State Department, I indicate treason to assure uranium nuclear arms race would proceed, and this occurred in 1943. We're 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 about 1 year after thorium was discovered, and they already planned plots against it, and we'll get into that. They also started up the Atomic Energy Act in 1946. That was to stop people talking about energy, especially thorium. They didn't want anyone talking about that. Then, to protect all the illegal things they were going to do, they passed the National Security Act of 1947. And once they had that, then they could do the Secret Patents Act of 1951, where they could limit technologies that might threaten their monopolies. And one of the prime ones they were going to prohibit was going to be thorium. But they needed the National Security Act to hide their theft and treason because it couldn't be discussed. And then by 1974, they created the EPA, and they would ban thorium and rare earth metals from even being processed in this country. All these things, no one in America knew was going on at the time, including many congressmen. Only those in the Joint Committee of Atomic Energy and in the AEC, Atomic Energy Commission under the executive, had any idea what was going on. We'll explore this topic further in Q&A. Okay, we're now in the 21st century. What did Wikipedia report concerning this successful thorium chemical reactor behind a laboratory wall since the 1960s, hidden behind there? I'll just comment on some of the highlighted stuff I do here. 1968, Nobel laureate and discoverer of plutonium, Glenn Seaborg, publicly announced the atomic energy to the Atomic Energy Commission. He can't talk about this to the public because it's thorium. But he is the chairman that the thorium-based reactor had successfully been developed and tested. And you see an image of them here testing it. This is Glenn Seaborg here years later. It was Glenn that discovered thorium and got the Nobel Prize for it based on his work in 1942. Again, I'm mentioning some of these people and pointing them out because they're going to pop up later. Once launched, as we said earlier, it operated to 1969, broke the 6,000 hours of continuous operation. It was amazing. Now, we talked about the politics involved with this. Well, how high does it go? Like, the question would be, who was Glenn Seaborg's boss and champion of this technology? Well, it was President Kennedy. He was the one that circumvented Chester Holyfield, who was chairman of the Joint Committee on Atomic Energy, by going under the 10,000 kilowatt demand. He supplied money for it because he was the champion of this, and he was in conflict with oil politicians, and that's why they didn't want him as president in the first place. They wanted Lyndon Baines Johnson. Well, a bullet later, lo and behold, Lyndon Baines Johnson became the next president. He served one term, and he was paranoid after Kennedy's death, and his health was such that he decided he took over Kennedy's 1 year and then had 4 of his own, but chose not to run after that. And that's when Nixon came in. President Nixon. So let's see what's highlighted here. In 1973, however, and this is again looking in hindsight, what's being written in newspapers and stuff. It says, in 1973, however, the U.S. government shut down all thorium nuclear research. Was merely it had been operating up until December 31st, 1969. Management told them to turn it off, and it never turned on again. It lay dormant there, exposed for about 3 years. And what was the explanation for the screw up? They said, well, was an excusable mistake. Incompetence is what they want to call it, but it was more than that, as we'll see later. Only after the technology was rediscovered does the public learn the inventor had actually been fired 25 years earlier, that Alvin Weinberg. Remember how they wanted to shut down the equipment, but Alvin told them, no, if you did, you'll have to pay all these people because they've got long-term contracts. And so he was always battling them all the time, and eventually they got him. And it's commented here, nuclear physicist Alvin Weinberg, who was director of Oak Ridge National Laboratories, was primarily responsible for the new reactor, lost his job as director because he championed the development of the safer thorium reactors. And here's an image we're going to be talking about a lot in many sections. The inventor, Alvin Weinberg. He wasn't only the inventor of the thorium molten salt reactor, he's also the inventor of the uranium pressurized light water reactor too. So if anyone knows the strengths and weaknesses of each, since he's the inventor of both, I would think he'd have a little credibility. But as it says here, Weinberg himself recalls, he wrote this in a book, but the book was written about 25, 30 years later, because knowledge of thorium started to get out, so he could talk about it a little bit. And he said here, Chester Holyfield was clearly exasperated with me, and he finally blurted out, Alvin, if you are so concerned about the safety of reactors, well, he knows both. And by the way, Chester Holyfield was a haberdasher, sixth grade education, and sold clothing. For him to question the youngest director of Oak Ridge National Laboratories, and he was number 2 on the Manhattan Project in the way of the youngest scientist. Anyway, then I think it may be time for you to leave the nuclear industry. To which, in his book, Alvin wrote, I was speechless, but it's apparent to me that my style, my attitude, and my perception of the future was no longer in tune with the powers within the Atomic Energy Commission. One thing I'll point out here, Chester Holyfield is congressional. He's chairman of the Joint Committee on Atomic Energy. He is not under the executive branch. There's no way he should be firing Alvin Weinberg unless the president is in with him on it, and we'll get into that a little later. There is the inventor's antagonist that I was following, Chester E. Holyfield. December 3rd is his birthday. That'll come into play later. Anyway, here's a book that he published after he left Congress, or was told to leave Congress. What was great, it was a very insightful book for me, because what happened was he had a ghostwriter working with him, and so he's protecting what can go in and out. But then the ghostwriter died. So Chester gets another ghostwriter, and as he starts to work on it, Chester Holyfield dies. So the ghostwriter ended up putting a lot of things in the book I think Holyfield would have not allowed. And so there was a treasure trove of information in that when I went through it. And there's video interviews with him and so forth. Everything shows he was essentially an empty-suited hillbilly. Excuse me. Anyway, Thanks to Robert Oppenheimer's introduction, Senator John F. Kennedy learns of Weinberg's invention, which could end nuclear arms race and the age of fossil fuels by the end of the 20th century. Oh, I haven't mentioned yet that one of the things the military and oil industry did not like about thorium is it was too unstable to make atomic bombs from it. And it didn't leave any waste material to make into bombs. It consumed all the thorium. It was such a win-win. It was a huge loser for the oil and banking industry that had control of other energy monopolies. So here's a picture of thorium. Weinberg and Kennedy discussing the success of the 53 testing of the 150 kilowatt hour system. President Kennedy made the inventor his scientific advisor, and JFK championed thorium reactors in the early 60s against all the protests I mentioned to you earlier. Congressman Holyfield and Vice President Johnson were ordered to kill the invention because what they represent. Here's a picture that artificial intelligence says doesn't exist, but it's in Chester Holyfield's book. And here you have Lyndon Baines Johnson, you have Chester Holyfield, and Kennedy. Excuse me. One of these is not like the other. Anyway, Chester Holyfield comes from Los Angeles, and you can see all the oil rigs and so forth. He was put in by the oil industry. Holyfield's Los Angeles Congressional District 19. If we look at Lyndon Baines Johnson, here's the Texas boom, and he's out of Dallas, and big oil again. And he's in the U.S. Senate, and Chester Holyfield's in Congress. In fact, if anyone ever wants to look it up, it was an article put out on the 50th year anniversary of John F. Kennedy called JFK versus the Empire. The thing that we're discussing that he is battling, it was a great article. It can be found on the internet. JFK had spoken enthusiastically of thorium, which, and again, this ticks off people because thorium is confidential, but a president can talk about it. So he's talking about thorium as late as October 26, 1963. In that speech, Kennedy promised all Americans that by the end of the 20th century, all electricity would be produced from thorium, a transformative technology that would change mankind's future for all time. A lot of people weren't happy with that speech. Thanks to the American exceptionalism, the age of atomic thorium was going to carry man to the heavens and beyond. President Kennedy was murdered 27 days after that speech. Somebody didn't like it. And here's links to the articles and videos on this. Following the trail of major puppet master, President Kennedy murder could not have proceeded without the puppet master's blessing. In the image to the right, we see Edward Pauley right here. Here they're getting ready to start the Dallas trip in LBJ's city of Dallas. I mean, unfortunately, he was a sitting duck. And there were many reasons to kill off Kennedy by the bad guys, and this is just another one. Pauley was a man who gave the signal, in my opinion, at the Dallas airport to go ahead and pull off the Secret Servicemen who ran beside the presidential car on this fateful day. I've seen films where the Secret Servicemen just couldn't understand why they were told to stand down. Here we have the case of the champion of thorium now in a coffin. And if any of you are my age or have followed any of this, think of someone who's been assassinated and the drama and concern that occurs for weeks, if not months afterwards. Just 8 days after President JFK's burial, Lyndon Baines Johnson, the president, calls I'm not mistaken when I say that. His boss, Chester Holyfield, he calls from the White House to wish Chester Holyfield a happy birthday. This is December 3rd. And in this phone call, this brief phone call, he's going to grant him a wish. As chairman of the Joint Committee on Atomic Energy, Holyfield could now pursue thorium's demise. That's my opinion from all the research and able to work backwards. And so within a few months of the phone call, Holyfield changes laboratory priorities and leadership. To not raise suspicion, it would take about a decade to ultimately shut down the threatening technology to oil and dismiss the inventor. They had to go at a snail's pace because they're also going to use the thorium technology for blackmail in the Middle East, but I'll get into that a little later. Talk about an oily fox guarding the nuclear research henhouse. In my research, I stumbled on an amazing smoking gun. It was a White House phone call on December 3rd, 1963. When I listened to it and realized what I had, I scanned it, I archived it, I recorded the phone call because I knew as soon as I spoke about it about 10 years ago, it would disappear, and it did. But here we go. You can't find this now, or at least I have not been able to find this in the White House listing. Now, it's going to be Lyndon Baines Johnson, the president, calling a congressman to wish him happy birthday. And I captured this because I wanted to show all the calls before and after. So this is call number 19, Chet Holyfield. And we'll let it go.
Congressman Holyfield, 2191.
Yes, hello, Mr. How you doing? I'm pretty good. Happy birthday. Thank you very much. I just want you to know I was thinking of my chief nominator, and I just want to wish you many happy returns of the day. Well, thank you very much. I know how busy you've been, and I want you to know how proud I've been of the way you've been handling yourself. I saw you all during my speech at the joint session the other day. Well, I was also down yesterday at this fair. Yes, that's right. Yeah. But I didn't bother to speak with you. Sometime pretty soon, Senator Anderson, Senator Pastor, and Mel Price and I want to come down and spend a few minutes with you talking about this overall atomic energy program. Be glad to. We'll work it out. We'll work something out. And I appreciate very much your call. Thank you, Chief. Bye.
Thank you.
There you go. The last part of that we need to get together and talk about the atomic energy program. What they want to talk about is how are they going to kill the thorium and get Elvin Weinberg and others out of there. They're going to essentially capture the Oak Ridge National Laboratories. It was wrestled away from the military in the 40s under a guy named Jerry Voorhees, a congressman. He was going to be the first first chairman of the Joint Committee on Atomic Energy, but they did everything they could to keep him from winning his sixth term because it would have destroyed the oil industry. It's just, there's so much going on here, but the key thing is I'm able to work backwards. Having that call, but being 30, 40 years into the future, I can research backwards to see what was that all about. Now, Johnson, as I said, he did about 5 years, finished Kennedy's term, then did one of his own, and then Nixon took over. Now, here's a case where they're both out of Los Angeles. March 29, 1971, both are flying back to Los Angeles oil industry. They're both oilmen. I call Chester Holyfield head of state. He has all the purse strings. He really is in charge of presidents and so forth. He's an empty suit. He reports to Edward Pauley, an oil mogul that we'll get into later. But essentially, he hitches a ride on the president's plane and instructs Nixon he must promote essentially inferior nuclear technology. They're going to push the pressurized light water reactor, uranium, because it produces material for atomic bombs. They want to make about $9 trillion in the arms race over time. And they're actually hoping there'll be an accident with that too, because they're going to make everyone hate nuclear energy, ram it down their throat, cut corners, hoping there'll be a big accident, more like Fukushima than 3 Mile. But anyway, that's going on. They wanted him to create the EPA to help drive manufacturing to China, and we'll explain what's going on there. But essentially, there's been a determination that even back then that they were going to turn the United States into service industry and eat it from within. And just as power went from Britain to the United States, there's those in power that are already planning for it to go to China at some point. And to replace, and they needed the oil to not go obsolete, because they know, as has happened in prior centuries, they've introduced fiat money, the Federal Reserve notes, and that only lasts so long until they get China ready. They need oil so that they can back the dollar with oil once the gold is stopped as a backer, which happened in 1971. A lot of stuff is going on behind the scenes. Once this is all accomplished, President Nixon is forced to resign by August 1974. Once they've got everything placed, they've stopped thorium, they've got uranium in, light water reactors, they're flying all over the place, they're doing shortcuts. They just can't wait for one of them to have an accident. They want to make certain there's no fingers pointed at them. So they've got to get Nixon out of office. They got to get Holyfield out of office because he's oil. Another guy named Hosmer they got to get out of office, so that when eventually the nuclear industry implodes, there's nothing to point to in the way of congressional people there that created the situation. These politicians, so Holyfield and Hosmer, once they passed laws saying you can't research thorium any longer, and anything thorium is found with can't be manufactured either or processed. That was the rare earth metals, which there's a lot of stuff in the news today, how we're trying to get rare earth metals on our own. All this was being shipped over China in a treasonous setup that most Americans wouldn't know about. 10 years later, 1984, some of the information is going to come out. Remember this picture here where I showed you earlier? These two oil men and President Kennedy is going to be dead within a year. Who done it? Well, here's some information that the media does not allow out to the public. Unknown to the general American public and never mentioned in history books is the fact that in 1984, a Texas Franklin County grand jury had officially indicted and found Lyndon Baines Johnson guilty as a co-conspirator in the following 8 murders. Here's a 1 minute.
The full extent of Johnson's criminal activity only began to unravel 11 years after his death. In 1984, at this courthouse in Franklin, Texas, a former Johnson business associate, Billy Celestes, appeared before a grand jury.
According to Billy Celestes, there were 8 murders perpetrated on the part of Lyndon Johnson. The first name was a man named Douglas Kenza. That was followed by a number of men involved in Estes businesses who were corrupt. and they were all killed with carbon monoxide. Josepha Johnson's name is listed on this Justice Department document. That's Lyndon Johnson's sister. So Estes is accusing the Vice President of the United States of murdering his own sister. And the eighth name listed is the President of the United States, John F. Kennedy. And then there is a promise of knowing more. And if Billy Celestes is telling the truth, and there is every reason to believe he is, it gives you an idea of the depth of the corruption and the ruthlessness of Lyndon Johnson.
Now, I'm in essence giving you reasons why they need to get him out. There were 10 or 12 other reasons why the deep state, the elites, the banksters needed Kennedy out, but thorium was just another one of them. I've mentioned China a couple times. I just wanted to mention, for instance, like in 2018, you'll see here the Anonymous Patriot Condor. This is with American intelligence media. I've probably published 50 to 100 different articles over a 10-year period. This one was global elites use us, abuse us, and dumped us. And essentially, I use the example of, as horrific as it might sound, I have concluded the global elites see its present host, the United States, like the poor spider in the side picture. The wasp will live on through its larvae by digesting its host country and then moving on to the next meal or target. It typically takes 1 or 2 centuries to complete the process and destroy the host. I'm talking about nations that become host to the reserve currency. Foreign central bank injects fiat paper money into the host. Before the United States, they feasted on Europe. Prior to Europe, it was the Mediterranean region, and then there was the Middle East. They've been now preparing for the larvae or the wasp to fly on to China once they get done with us. So a history of portrayal of the United States to China, 58 through the present. I wanted to give you some items you could watch down the road that is extremely insightful. I don't know if you've seen this. It says, you've heard the saying, those who don't study history are doomed to repeat it. Yet those who do study history are doomed to stand by helplessly while everyone else repeats it. That's how I have felt over the last 10 or 12 years. A lot of the things I've talked about with respect to energy, weather, a number of other topics. I've got documents out there indicating what I thought was going to happen at a certain point in time, and the chickens are coming home to roost, as someone famously said. Cliff High, and all the stuff I've done, he's put together a 72-minute video. It was done on October 8th, 2021. I have the link for it here. An amazing summary of what's going on and what's transpiring presently. I'm going to give you a little snippet of it, along with 3 or 4 other snippets of other resources. He's going to talk about how the United States was set up when Nixon and George W. Bush went over to China. Here we go.
And they had him doing meeting the Pakistani ambassador, that kind of thing. And so, but no one was saying, but no. Anyway, though, in 1972, some really interesting stuff happened because we had the Nixon opening up China, all right? Nixon and Bush. And Bush is the real key player here. This is Papa Bush and Bush Sr. And they opened up China. So they go in and they actually meet with and start doing business with the CCP in an open fashion in 1972. And Mao retires here in 76. But in 1973, Bush had set...
I'm going to pause it for a moment. 1972. That is the year Alvin Weinberg was fired and some treason occurred over in the Middle East. 72 is a big year where they're going full bore on things they're going to do to really screw over the United States.
Bush had 700 factories under his control in China. Nominal ownership, titles to them, all different kinds of different ways to own them. He had 700 factories in a year. They set those deals up when he went over with and met with the CCP in 71 or in 72. So now the CCP was operating on a plan that Mao had come up with before he retired in 1958, in which Mao had said, or before he was retired, Mao had said, we can conquer the West, and we must conquer the West. Okay, so between 1958, when Mao made this particular speech, and really 1968, so over the course of those 10 years, China, the CCP, was developing this plan that had been based on Mao's concept. How much of it he was relaying, how much of it he created, I don't know. He was the mouthpiece for it, and they called it the three facilities, okay, or the three pathways might be a better way to define it. And it was the three pathways for China to conquer the planet. And it was based on this idea that they had, that Mao had in 1958, that it must be done, that China must conquer all of the planet in order for the CCP to survive. He couches it in nationalistic terms and racial terms even, and ideology terms, but it was basically a recognizing of the fact that they didn't have moral authority and that they could be swept aside at any time that their control was in any way loosened, all right? So in 1958, Mao comes up with this plan, or as I say, the three facilities, the three pathways plan is devised. In that, there's these three pathways to them conquering all of Earth. And what they're going to basically do is to destroy the West from the inside out by making them dependent on cheap Chinese labor, subverting their royals and leaders, our royals and leaders, by making those people dependent on the output of the cheap Chinese labor in the form of bribes and participation and so on. Whereas the populace here in the West would be induced to buy cheap Chinese goods. And of course, all this pops up China by getting all this money anyway through the process. And subvert our culture that way. And then a deliberate attack in the form of the subversion of the media and a long march through the institutions. And so that was begun in the 60s, and we're living in that world now. All right, so all of the CCP attack in the United States against the West, not just the United States, was begun in this period of time from 1958 to 1968 when they solidified the three pathways plan. And that plan led to, in the 1970s, this particular late 70s, like 79, I think, this particular...
You had for decades U.S. corporations that are not U.S. corporations, and they're not European corporations, they're cult corporations, the same cult that controls China. They've been outsourcing their production to China and the East, especially China. And so they've given China all the aces in terms of supply, of producing and supplying basic products, etc. This has all been orchestrated.
Per global martial law, global power must change hands somewhere between 75 or 80 years, or the empire will fall. And they know this. That is what we're seeing right now taking place in America. So in 1947, and the central bank has been around for thousands of years. It used to be in France. It used to be in Spain. It was in the UK, actually, as World War II started to wind down. The UK was the reserve currency of the world. They had the private West central bank system there, and everything was shifted over to the United States. And when you look back in 1913, you can see they were prepping the United States for this. And what's very interesting is that Natalie Winters on X, she wrote a Substack on the Federal Reserve saying that China is already inside the Federal Reserve. Fed employees have been detained, bribed, and recruited by Chinese operatives, she says. Sensitive U.S. economic data was handed over under Jerome Powell's watch. This isn't a theory. It's documented espionage. And this is what her Substack says. Shocking new evidence of Chinese infiltration of America's central bank. So there is hard evidence that China now is pretty much calling the shots in the Fed. Now, this kind of makes sense because if you really think about it, the deep state players, the central bankers, what were they preparing to do? They were preparing to move the entire financial system to China, away from the EU and especially away from the United States. What better way to do this than to infiltrate the Federal Reserve?
So those are some snippets. Now, with Cliff High, if anyone watches the 72-minute video, one of the driving forces for the Chinese is we've been given a lot of bull about global warming. They know from their history and knowledge of climate cycles and so forth, we're heading back to a cold period. They don't have enough food to supply their people, and it could get overthrown. They want to essentially empty out the United States and take it over for farming to feed their masses. kind of like when the Ice Age occurred in Europe and Europeans came over to the United States during the mini Ice Age, and a lot of the farming and stuff here and Native Americans were eliminated. Chinese just want to do what the Europeans did in the 16 and 1700s. Let me continue here. There's one more slide here, but before I get into it, you got any questions right now?
No, I'm a little bit more curious actually about, you mentioned an ice age, what, in the 1600s?
Yeah, it went from around the 1300s to about 1750, thereabouts. Then it has to deal with sun cycles too, in a way of how much energy it puts out. That could be a discussion for another day if you like. The key thing is Russia, India, they're all putting in coal plants, and of course China has gone with our thorium because they know the direction we're heading in, and part of the disinformation here in the United States is that we're getting warmer and warmer, and people are starting to realize, like, how can Florida be freezing and Georgia and other places when all they've talked about is things burning up? And there's going to be a lot more information about that. But Cliff High does an excellent job in that 72-minute video. He did in 72 minutes what I've been researching and writing about for the last 15, 20 years.
Yeah, no, because I definitely know about how, like, they're basically backtracking on the whole global warming thing, and they're now calling it climate change, just because obviously the climate changes. I've never heard of, like, a mini ice age happening between that period. That's what that's what kind of caught my attention there. So that's some information I just never knew about.
There's a gentleman, if you ever look at Weathering the Weather, there's a David Dilley who he and I both spoke at this conference. We were the two lead speakers. He talked about climate change, and he was ex-military, then with NOAA, and then started his own weather forecasting service. He's been the most accurate in the last 10 or 15 years because he doesn't use falsified data. He relies on a number of things that happen like clockwork due to the moon around the earth, the sun, currents. He did an excellent presentation on that. And then my presentation was on if we are heading towards global cooling, which means carbon dioxide is bullshit. It's plant food. Nothing more. It's not a pollutant. And if we're cooling, that blows out their theory about carbon dioxide. And that means the probably $4 or $5 trillion we've spent in the last 20 years, we could have used that money on other things. Potable water, desalination. We could have done GALT chemical reactors, molten salt thorium reactors. So with the last slide or two here, what we're going to discuss is the Federal Reserve and global banking. And as I mentioned earlier in that paper about the wasp and the spider, people don't realize when someone's designated as the reserve currency, they're thinking, oh, wow, that's great. That is a death sentence. They designate someone who's doing too well, and they're going to set them up to be the global reserve currency, which means just like that spider, they inject you with their venom and then eat you from the inside out over the next 80 to 100 years. I'm going to cite some examples here. And so we're almost done with this first presentation, part one. So we've been the global reserve currency from 1920 to about 2025 now. So what's the relevance? Probably can't see it to our nation has been officially targeted for rape, plunder, and destruction and genocide over a specific designated time period. Who is doing it? Generational bankster grifters have been destroying nations with global reserve currency resets throughout history. It's like once they designate you and you're the reserve currency, it's like a sand clock. You've got a death sentence, typically 80 to 100 years is what you have for them to pull everything out of you they can, gold, silver, property, precious metals. They give you worthless paper money, and then they'll set off a war or something to distract you as the carpetbaggers go to the next host. Financial resets require a global distraction crisis. Example, I'm going to go back almost 1,000 years quickly. 1096 to 1291, treacherous Venetian bankers sponsored 8 major profitable holy crusades, murdering millions of Christians and Muslims alike. You usually find these banksters, they're not Christian or Muslim. They're more Luciferian. They love religious people killing each other. 1206 to 1208, the Venetian bankers' fourth crusade they sacked Christian cities of Zara and Constantinople, not the Muslims. They wanted to eliminate financial competitors. You don't usually hear about that too much. In 1453, the bankers wanted to start up wars in Europe because a guy named Nicola Cusa, he was number 2 in the Catholic Church. He was actually uniting the Greek Church with the Latin Church, and he had convinced kings and royalty that the people aren't there to serve them. If they want to be in the good graces of God, they have to serve the people. And he started a movement there that was going to work out well. The banksters couldn't have that. They needed the Muslims to attack Europe. But the Muslims wouldn't do it as long as Constantinople was behind them, because then they'd have two fronts. So what did the Venetian bankers do? Constantinople falls to the Muslims thanks to new long-barreled cannon technology secretly funded to Muslims by the same Venetian bankers. Constantinople was 90% of it was island with a little. It was kind of like a peninsula. You couldn't get to it, but with the long cannons, they could take down the mighty walls. So this is the kind of stuff that goes on in history. Anyway, once they fell, Portugal was now the global reserve currency. They lasted about 80 years, from 1450 to 1530. Then there was the Portuguese secession crisis, the Libertarian Union. There was a lot of strife and battles occurring. And when they collapsed, during that time span, Spain was picked as the next host. They lasted about 110 years. There was the Dutch occupation, 30-year war, a lot of revolts. All these things, again, they just think of that spider and that wasp larvae. They insert fiat money and they start taking over. As Spain collapsed, the Netherlands was the next host, and they got 80 years. Dutch East India declined, the Anglo-Dutch wars. Again, these things are fermented to distract as you're dying. Then France became the next host. I'm familiar with that because it would be 1685. There are a lot of briquets over in France, and we were Huguenots, and so most of my relatives got destroyed over there. Only a few escaped. But this is all part of the turmoil. And as they're dying towards the end, then you have the French Revolution and the Napoleonic War versus Europe and the Tartarian Empire. All those battles are going on to even weaken them more. And the individuals who escaped France, many of them went to England, and that started the Industrial Revolution there. But as they waned from the Great Depression, World Wars, the Bolshevik Revolution for Russia, the question is, plus the thorium sabotage allowed petrodollar to prolong U.S. global currency life for another 30 or 40 years. In fact, let's see, the petrodollar program began in '74 and it ended in 2024. So it went about 40 years. We're now floating. Paper doesn't have anything backing it. And so who is the next host country and what crisis will take out the U.S.? You see a lot of things going on right now. So I'm watching all this deep in the woods of Maine. Initially, they had planned on Russia to be the next host. That's why they did the Bolshevik Revolution, to get rid of the Christians and have the essentially the Bolsheviks take over, Luciferian to quite a degree. Anyway, the only problem was the Bolshevik Revolution was to prep Russia for the 21st century, but after Lenin died, he was poisoned by Stalin, and Stalin wrote a letter saying that Lenin was making him the boss instead of Trotsky, who the bankers wanted. Trotsky had to escape off to Mexico, and I think he got an ice pick in the back of the head. The deep state was not happy with Stalin, so they finally said, screw it. Instead of Russia, we're gonna make China the next host. And that gets into the stuff you saw earlier with Cliff High and others in 1972, and Nixon and Bush going over. And that's why the big sucking sound of hundreds of thousands of manufacturing companies and stuff going over to the Pacific Rim. It was all planned to weaken and eventually destroy us from the inside. By the 1960s, the bankers abandoned Russia and prepped for China now. The question's got to be asked, though. Look at, we have 1,000 years here. How do these parasite generational grifters remain invisible to humanity? How do they get away with it? Well, one of the key things, this is from Van Helsing movie, 2004, and I write here, evil cabals continually seek to own the publishing industry and the mainstream media throughout time. There is as much chance of them being exposed through written history as seeing a vampire's reflection in a mirror. And I take this one step further. Here you have a woman, she sees a room just filled with all these bankers. But if you look in the mirror, she's there by herself. She doesn't know she's around all these bloodsuckers. And this goes on century after century after century. One of the battles going on right now, in my opinion, if Trump is a good guy, this is why he's trying to take out the Federal Reserve and return tariffs and so forth, so that we become independent of these bloodsuckers. In closing, to part one, the thorium story, what might be a critical step in getting our ship upright here in the 21st century? Former Maine State Senator and molten salt thorium supporter, the Honorable Mike Brakey, has ended over 200 nationwide podcasts with the following closing statement. We will also do it here.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. Furthermore, my opinion is the Federal Reserve should be destroyed.
So I hope everybody enjoyed part one of Thorium's Atlas Shrugged moment, unlocking the forbidden fuel. And I hope you will join us for part two, the Atlas Shrugged code, coming soon. Thanks a lot, and see y'all next time.